Hey everyone, welcome back to MEELive. For the second time while negotiations over Iran's nuclear program were underway, both the US and Israel have launched a war on Iran. Now, what is the US endgame, and what does the war mean for Israeli expansionism in the region? To unpack this and more, we're joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist and best-selling author Chris Hedges. Chris, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Mohammed.
It's good to see you. Chris, the last time we spoke, it was during the 2024 U.S. elections. At the time, Kamala Harris had just entered the race, and there was a lot of hype around her going in. There was very few people predicting that Trump was going to win the election. You were one of those few that I was speaking to at the time. Now, what was interesting from our interview is also you were saying that we are witnessing the end of the U.S. empire. Now, a year into Trump's second term, with this war in Iran underway, where are we?
Well, the empire is imploding at a dizzying rate, both domestically and internationally. The Trump administration is running roughshod over democratic institutions, the rule of law, creating essentially paramilitary vigilante forces through ICE of common phenomena of any dictatorship, whether that's Pinochet in Chile or Modi in India or the Basiji in Iran. And he's ripped up the traditional alliances, very disdainful and disrespectful towards Europe. He, of course, kidnapped the president of Venezuela, Maduro, and assassinated the supreme leader in Iran. It's a lawless world led by idiots. The people around Trump himself and the people around him are clueless about what they're doing. I think this debacle that they've begun with Iran illustrates that. The idea that you would send off Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to negotiate. And of course, the demands that they make are, this is before the war began, were never going to be acceptable to the Iranians. It's if they destroyed their nuclear enrichment program and curtail their ballistic missile program, there would be no new sanctions. Well, the sanctions are already so onerous and crippling, which has devastated the Iranian economy. That's hardly an incentive in the same way that they demand that Hamas disarm. So these are people who don't understand what they're doing. Unfortunately, they have the power to wield the might of the U.S. military, and this has gotten them into tremendous trouble in the Middle East. I don't see an off-ramp for this. I don't see how they're going to get out of it. And the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to be for Israel and the United States.
You say you don't see an off-ramp for this. Let me ask you about this, though. There's a term that's been being thrown around quite a bit recently, which is World War III, that we're entering World War III. Now, would you agree with that sentiment, or is this much more of like an alarmist take?
Wars, I covered a lot of wars
Yes, you did.
Around the globe, and they have a force of their own. They control you. You don't control it. So as the world economy goes into deep crisis, which is what will happen the longer the Strait of Hormuz is shut down, then there will be more and more incentive on the part of states that are affected, and primarily the United States, Europe, and Israel, to ratchet up increase the level of aggression that towards Iran. So you can never tell. I'm not running around saying that it's going to be World War III.
No.
On the other hand, you flirt with that possibility the longer this continues.
I'll tell you why I ask it though, Chris, because I'm sure as you've seen, there's been recent reports on Russia and China possibly entering this war as well. Russia in the sense of sharing intelligence with Iran on American troops, and China. There were reports that China was possibly preparing to give Iran financial assistance. Now, how significant is that in your view?
Well, I'm pretty certain the Russians are already giving the Iranians intelligence. In fact, there have been press reports in the United States saying that. Of course they are, because the Americans give the Ukrainians intelligence to attack the Russians. And I would guess the Chinese are probably doing the same. This, this has regional impacts for U.S. hegemony in the Middle East, and not good ones. And this plays into the hands of both the Russians and the Chinese. So would they actively become engaged in a war? We're a long way from that. Are they providing intelligence? Almost certainly. Are they providing financial support and weaponry? Probably.
And you mentioned that you've covered different wars. Let me ask you about this. What are the parallels between this war right now and what we saw unfold in Iraq? And I'm not specifically referring to missile strikes or war tactics. I'm also talking about the buildup, those at home beating the drums of war. What parallels can we draw?
Well, there are a couple differences I'll cite first.
Go ahead.
The Bush administration mounted a full-throated propaganda campaign to inculcate fear. We can't, as Condoleezza Rice has said, we can't let the next sign or, be a smoking mushroom cloud or whatever she said, a mushroom cloud. So there was, it was based on, false information that Saddam Hussein was building weapons of mass destruction, had links with Al Qaeda, etc. But they turned the public so that there was initially broad support for the war. That we didn't see. This is a war that the Trump administration made no attempt to sell to an American public that doesn't want it. That's a big difference. The other big difference is that although Iraq was heavily bombed, they realized that in order to carry out regime change and control Iraq, they needed large numbers of American troops to go into Iraq. So those are the differences. The similarities is that both of these wars are based on fallacies. Iran, even the U.S. intelligence estimates claim that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. Iran was not a threat to its neighbors. It is not the world's primary source of terrorism. That's just false. So again, and then we had this, on the one hand, Trump last June, after the 12 days of strikes, claiming that the nuclear program had been obliterated, and now they resurrect that old lie that they used to justify the war in Iraq, that they're a week away. A week away. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying Iran is a week away from building a nuclear weapon for about 3 decades. So, and I would say the other similarity is a terrible miscalculation. These were non-reality based belief systems. The Bush administration, led by the neocons, and Israel was a prime proponent of the war in Iraq, argued that we would be greeted as liberators, which anyone who knows anything about Baathism realized was ridiculous, that democracy would be implanted in Baghdad and emanate outwards across the Middle East. And even then, they were using, or they were talking about going after Iran once Iraq became a client state. Well, none of it worked out. And the same miscalculation, misunderstanding has taken place with Iran. And Iran was quite upfront about what would happen. if it was attacked. It wasn't a mystery that it would shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It said as much. It wasn't a mystery that it would go after U.S. bases and installations in the region. It said that, or the oil infrastructure or anything else. So it was a terrible misreading. They felt that if they took out the supreme leader, they would get a Venezuela type situation where the second tier of the leadership would buckle and get down on their knees and do what the Trump administration wanted. I'm sure that's what Bibi Netanyahu was telling Trump, who believed it, and that is just proven to be completely false. Iran is not Lebanon. Iran is not Iraq. Mm-hmm. Iran is not Yemen. Iran is not Syria. Iran is not Libya. Iran is the size of Western Europe with a population of 90 million people. That's over 10 times the population of Israel. And it of course, under the combined might of the U.S. and the Israeli Air Force, it's no match. But it has a potential, as we have seen, to carry out some very devastating strikes. And you can already, I think, reading between the lines, a very heavy censorship, by the way, of course. So it's hard to know what has been struck and how serious the strikes have been in Israel or at U.S. bases throughout the region. But I think it's clear that Iran has inflicted a lot of harm, so that both Israel and the United States is realizing that this is not going well for them, and the longer it continues, the worse it's going to get.
Before I move on to Venezuela, because you mentioned it, it would be nice to get a couple of questions in there about it. Just as we're still on the Iraq, I guess, parallels and differences, this is what I want to understand, Chris, or I'm trying to understand. Like you said, the Iraq War is widely seen as a disaster now. And yet there's a lot of these same voices that have advocated for the Iraq War that are still being platformed again about Iran. How does that happen?
Yeah, Elliot Abrams, all these people never go away. I began my career as a reporter covering the conflicts in Central America. Elliot Abrams was the Undersecretary of State. Well, these people don't know what they're talking about. They're ideologues. They are racists. Look at the caricature of Iranians, which I worked in Iran, as bears no resemblance to the reality of Persian culture and the richness of it and the intellectual depth of it and sophistication, everything else. So they don't understand the world. How do they never go away? Well, because they're funded by the war industry in all of these think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, everything else. And they're never held accountable. So nobody's ever been held to account for the debacles in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and because they're not held to account, and because they are shills for the war industry, they're able to perpetuate and push the American empire from one fiasco to the next, including this one. And that is, of course, a symptom of a dying empire. There's no longer self-corrective mechanisms within it. And of course, we vomited up this, repugnant figure of Donald Trump. The whole breakdown of the constitutional of the separation of powers, so that Congress is supposed to declare war. The president cannot unilaterally declare war, but with the rise of the imperial presidency and the collapse of Congress as an instrument that shares power, Trump has unilaterally plunged the United States into this disaster. That's how it continues, and that is just a symptom of the decay of empire, and that it doesn't function anymore as a mechanism that can make rational decisions based on verifiable fact, based on an understanding of other cultures. That we've destroyed the State Department. The United States now speaks, I mean, the mailed fist was always, of course, there, but now it speaks exclusively in the language of horrific violence. So what we saw in Gaza, I mean, I think they would like to do to Tehran what they've done to Gaza. I don't think that's going to work in Iran. Gaza's a tiny place, but that's the only thing left. They don't. We've destroyed all of those quote unquote mechanisms of soft power. USAID, Voice of America, Institute for Democracy, all that kind of stuff is gone. It's just either you do what we say or we stomp your face into the ground. And that misunderstanding that we don't need allies. And Trump has been very disdainful to our traditional allies, including, of course, Mexico and Canada, who are our largest trading partners, not actually China. So, yeah, these are all symptomatic of an empire in deep, deep decay.
All right. Well, there's a lot that I want to unpack here, but since I said I'm going to ask you about Venezuela, you said Trump was plunging the U.S. into a disaster. You also said about how Iran is a big miscalculation. Let me ask you about what you think appeals to Trump about this war. I mean, if we're looking at it from the Trump camp's perspective, Venezuela was a quote unquote strategic win in a way, and that's how they would see it or how they would justify it. But what's different about this? What is the calculation? What is the strategic win that the Trump camp believed that they could have gotten out of this war on Iran?
Well, I don't think they're thinking strategically. Trump is not very bright and very impulsive. And I think that's the problem. There is no real strategy. I think Bibi, I'm guessing, Bibi's been lobbying for this war for 3 decades. And every U.S. administration, no matter how friendly they were in Israel, has refused to sign on for the reasons we now know. And I think Trump, in his simplistic, childish mind, thought, oh, I took out Maduro, kidnapped Maduro, I'll wipe out the supreme leader and everyone will, shake with fear and do what I want. That's just a terrible misreading of the power structure in Iran, which I won't get into, but which is diffuse, and Iranians themselves. So they made a terrible, terrible miscalculation, and now they don't know what to do. They don't have any contingency plans. They don't know how they're. I mean, Trump has posited the idea that U.S. warships will escort tankers and cargo ships through the Strait of Hormuz, which is ridiculous because that would just be a turkey shoot. It would be like the Russian Imperial Navy in 1905 that decided to attack the Japanese with all of the same kind of racism that we see exhibited towards the Iranians, and the entire Russian fleet was sunk. So, I mean, I think it appears naval commanders have said that's, it's a suicide mission, but they don't know what to do. And now we've just had cargo ships hit, probably by mines. The Iranians have threatened to mine the Strait of Hormuz. So they don't know what to do. I mean, other than continue saturation bombing. They don't have any solution. And going all the way back decades, you cannot win a war purely on air power. You can inflict, of course, tremendous amounts of damage. But unless you send in troops to occupy a country, you cannot carry out regime change. I think, the history of warfare is extremely clear on that. And what are we going to do? Send in 1 million, which would be a minimum, 1 million U.S. soldiers to try and occupy Iran? This would be insane. Although, as they get more and more desperate, who knows?
Well, actually, since you say that you don't think that they're thinking strategically, let me actually play you this clip of Steve Witkoff, and I'll get your reaction to it if our producer in the gallery can play it.
Who will say there's no evidence that they were that close and no urgency to move now. What do you say to that?
Who actually shows evidence of their weapon? Would a murderer do such a thing? Everybody has known that they have been testing for weaponization since 2003. The IAEA has attested to that. So we know that they've done all kinds of testing on weapons. And it wouldn't be all that much for them to do a World War II vintage type weapon.
Now, Chris, can you speak to that rhetoric, this idea that no proof is needed because the lack of proof basically proves the point?
A real estate developer who doesn't understand anything about weapons or the Middle East or Iran, or I mean, this is part of the whole Trump administration is just run by grifters and con artists and Christian fascists, and whose primary quality is sycophancy towards Trump. But they're utterly incompetent, whether it's Kristi Noem, who we just got rid of at DHS, or the labor secretary, or Marco Rubio. The empire has been turned over to walking idiots, and Witkoff is one of them.
All right. Well, let me actually get you a Netanyahu quote that I'll read you, since we mentioned Bibi as well, and they're obviously the other belligerent in this war. Now, Netanyahu recently said, "This combined effort allows us to do what I've hoped to achieve for 40 years," and unquote. Is there a line that we can draw here, Chris, between this war and the agenda of Greater Israel?
Oh, well, this is a Greater Israel project. I mean, Rubio, he got slapped down for it, but he said the U.S. went to war because Israel was going to go to war anyway.
Yes.
And they had to attack because they were worried about strikes should Israel begin to bomb Iran against U.S. targets, which just defines the relationship that
Chris, if I may interject,
the United States is a kind of lackey.
Yeah, if I may interject, Chris, because this is something that I'd like to unpack with you. The agenda of Greater Israel. How does it correlate, or how does it relate? Because it's not like the Israelis are directly saying that they're going to annex Iran. So how do we see it through that prism of Greater Israel, or Israeli expansionism in the region in general?
Well, there is expansion. They're seizing Gaza, the de facto annexation of the West Bank, southern Lebanon. They've moved beyond the Golan Heights up to almost Damascus. All of that is, a physical expansion. Then there is the expansion of Greater Israel done through the creation of failed states, i.e. Syria, of course, the attacks on Lebanon, Libya, and Iraq. I mean, Iraq has been destroyed as a unified country. So that's how they either physically occupy or they fragment. I mean, the American goals for Iran are very different from the goals of Israel. Iran, in the eyes of Israel, must be broken up. That's why they want to empower, Kurds and other ethnic groups to essentially fragment Iran the way they did Iraq. The United States wants regime change. The goals are not the same.
The goals are not the same, but let me ask you about the opportunities. What do you think Donald Trump represents to Israelis and the Israeli government? I'm following here in the sense of what we're saying about Marco Rubio, basically saying that Israel forced America's hand. But what opportunities do the Israelis see in a Donald Trump administration?
What do you want me to make my dogs quiet?
Oh no, I can't hear your dogs actually.
Oh, okay. What opportunities Trump is the useful idiot. I mean, this has been a war that Netanyahu has spent a long time selling, and the Pentagon has spent a long time resisting. That Trump he's extremely ignorant and extremely pliable, and Bibi's gotten what he wanted, and Trump is in a real bind. He's in a real mess.
And you're saying he's in a real bind, and it's been what? This is day 12, I believe, of the war.
Yeah, it's just look, it's the effects of this. I mean, even if they open the Strait of Hormuz today, the ripple effects of this will continue for quite a while. And there are two things. One, the effect on the global economy, the energy shock, which is coming and is going to be nasty. But secondly, the hegemony that the United States has exercised in the Gulf is gone. All of these military bases not only have been hit, but the Gulf states, well, they weren't consulted. They didn't want this war. They're paying the price for it. And the United States, the idea of establishing military bases in these places is that they will protect countries like Qatar, but they haven't. In fact, most of the intercepting missiles, the Patriots, are being sent as fast as they can to Israel. So the effect of it is, I think that the longer this goes on, the more leverage Iran has. Iran's certainly hurt. I mean, Iran can't export oil too. It's being pounded by Israeli ordnance, airplanes, warplanes, in the U.S., everything else. So Iran is certainly getting hit. But if it can continue, and it has saved its most sophisticated hypersonic missiles, it's protected those with the, I think, very astute understanding that they have to, if they deplete the interceptors by sending over cheap drones and everything else, and by taking out radar stations, that's very important. They have taken out a lot of radar stations, essentially rendering both the Israelis and the Americans blind. They don't know what's coming in. Then they send in the heavy stuff. They can do a lot of damage. And if this continues, I could envision a point where Iran lays down its demands and the U.S. is forced to accept them. And that will obliterate the security pacts throughout the region, the hegemony that the United States has. It would be a really humiliating defeat for the United States. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't try and predict where wars are going, but that's a possibility.
And what about the opposition, the state of the opposition? Let me ask you about Reza Pahlavi. He was just on CBS. He did 60 Minutes not long ago, and he's the son of the deposed Shah, who's positioning himself to basically lead a transitional government to, quote, a democracy. What are your thoughts of him?
Well, not much. I mean, he has no following in Iran. They might want to implant him if they could, but I don't see him as a viable alternative to the power structure. I just don't see that happening. That's a fantasy. That's probably U.S. and Israeli fantasy.
Yeah, he's definitely Israel-backed. I don't think that's a secret. The reason why I ask you is because some critics might say, well, you know what, Chris, he does have genuine support. Like there's been protests in London, for example, where I am, where you'll see people carrying the Lion and Sun flag, the Israeli flag, and Pahlavi's posters or Pahlavi's pictures. Does that not count for something in your view?
No, because these are exiles. They're the old regime who fled, the people associated with the oligarchy around the monarchy, with Savak and the higher reaches of the Iranian military, utterly despised by Iranians, as they should be. It was a brutal, corrupt regime. And you saw the same thing with the war in Iraq. The exile community, Hanan Makea and other figures, told the Bush administration what it wanted to hear. But these people are woefully out of touch.
As well.
They've been in the country for years.
His name was Ahmed Chalabi.
Ahmed Chalabi. Yeah, also Hanan Makea was a major figure, but Ahmed Chalabi, who I knew, of course, and it was total sleaze. So the exile community is embracing the same kind of fantasies as the people that perpetuate the war, but they're not in touch with the country. They don't know what the country wants. And that was true in Iraq, and that's true in Iran.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about things on the domestic front in the U.S. According to the latest polls, I mean, Republicans are still largely behind Trump on this war. Democrats are basically the complete opposite. I mean, only 11% approve of this war. And yet, where is the Democratic leadership in all of this, Chris? I mean, you can't really say that they reflect the voter base.
Yeah, that's true. There's a heavy erosion within the Republican Party too over the war. I don't know the figures, but
Sure.
there's not uniform support in the Republican Party for the war. Well, the Democrats are angry that they weren't consulted. But they don't necessarily oppose the war. Schumer has long been a shill for Israel, as has much of the Democratic leadership. That gets into another issue. The Democratic Party doesn't really represent much other than the other side of the oligarchic and corporate ruling power structure. You saw that with Kamala Harris, who ran this vapid, issueless, celebrity-driven campaign, and you had 77% of registered Democrats saying they wanted arms shipments stopped to Israel, and she refused to even tepidly condemn the genocide. So these people are not beholden, both parties are not beholden in any way to a base, and perhaps the Republican Party is more beholden to a base, although I think we have to look at the Republican Party now as a kind of cult, personality cult built around Trump rather than a political party. But that again is emblematic of the collapse of American democracy, the rot within the American state, and the Democratic Party exhibits it in its own way as the Republican Party does.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about there being a split within the Republican Party over this war. And let me actually ask you about this, because we've also seen a split within the MAGA movement. Figures like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Matt Walsh, Marjorie Taylor Greene, basically publicly saying that this is Israel's war in one way or another. Now, is that significant to you when we see these voices publicly criticizing the war like this?
Yeah, it's significant because what it does is shows the extent to which Israel is being isolated now, even within its traditional right-wing base. Now, that may not have a real effect immediately, but in the long term, it's going to have a huge effect. And the whole America First, which is what J.D. Vance preached, and he's been pretty silent about this war, is a belief that, we have to look after our own interests and not the interests of the war industry or Israel. So that erosion, I don't think anyone's going to stop arms shipments to Israel now, and they're just talking about sending a few billion dollars more to Israel to help sustain this war as they sustain the genocide. But I think, certainly by the next generation, Israel's just not going to have any kind of credibility or any kind of following within the United States. Even young American Jews have kind of walked away from the Zionist project.
Do you fear the prospect of boots on the ground, Chris?
I fear it. It would. I know the Pentagon's always been opposed to a war with Iran, and it would take. They wouldn't win the war. It would take tremendous resources to invade, and I think 1 million troops is probably a minimum. It wouldn't work. But as wars escalate, they create their own centrifugal forces that you don't control. The whole in the beginning of World War I is kind of a perfect example of that. Barbara Tuchman's Guns of August lays it out. So you're funneled, you're pushed, you're coerced even to a certain extent to carry out escalatory measures in desperation. And I'm not going to predict that they're going to send troops, but the longer this continues, the more these kinds of desperate measures become options.
And you're someone, like you were saying at the beginning of the interview, you're someone that's covered war for decades, the Balkans, Gulf War, Iraq, Gaza. Is there anything about this war that feels different to you?
Every war has its own peculiar characteristics. Most wars are started based on lies. In that sense, there's no difference. I think that there are strong parallels. Remember, the Israelis and Bibi were lobbying heavily for the war in Iraq, just as they have lobbied heavily for the war in Iran. I would say if there is a difference, it is that the Trump administration has decided to defy, let's say, 3 decades of a decision by the Pentagon that there will be no war with Iran. That's the difference. They've essentially forced the Pentagon that never wanted to do this and was always adamantly against a war with Iran. They forced it to go to war with Iran.
And finally, before I let you go, Chris, I guess as we're talking right now, what do you believe your role is as a journalist amid all of this? What's your role today?
Well, I spent 7 years in the Middle East. As you know, I was the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times.
Yes.
I spent a lot of time in Iran, a lot of time in Gaza. And I think that my role is somebody who comes out of the region and understands the region and understands the instrument of war to caution the American public about the folly that the Trump administration has unleashed and the consequences. That's my role.
And we're going to leave it here. Chris Hedges, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for taking the time to come on MEELive. We appreciate your time. I want to thank my guest, Chris Hedges. And for today, that's all we have time for. But before we lose you, we want to hear from you. Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform or email MEELive@MiddleEastEye.net. Thank you so much for your time and see you next time.